All right, so welcome back. This is video number 4, dig deeper. So once you have solidified your idea, let's dig deeper. And what I mean by that is trying to actually analyze, break it down, start writing things down, and start brainstorming, because we've already done the research process. But this is usually when people go out and hire a programmer and they say, hey, I really like this plugin. And they approach a programmer and say, can you clone this plugin? Now, I caution you and I say, don't do this. That's a big mistake. And this is something that a lot of us do. I did it at one time. I've had seen a lot of people do this before, and it just creates a lot of heartache, lots of loss of money and loss of time. Because what you end up doing is you hand this idea to somebody else who has a different idea. So it's kind of like the telephone game where somebody tells you something and then you tell somebody something and then somebody else tells something. So their idea of what you just said has nothing to do with what you're thinking. So you want to make sure that you have a clear-cut project specification that says this is exactly what I want, and then they go and program it. All right? So that's the reason why I'm putting you through this process. So like I said, I repeat, never ask a programmer to clone another plugin. Make sure that you have dug deeper and figured out what exactly your plugin does. And it's okay. You want to figure out what the plugin should do, what your competitors aren't doing, and then making it better. So we talked briefly about this in the previous videos, but I really want to drive it home and I really want you to put it on paper. So that's why I am repeating a few things. So the goal in this video is to merely figure out what the major problem is. List out the problem, list out the solutions that are there for the problem and that solve the problem. Is there a manual process that can be automated? Is there a tedious process within this problem? Because that's a good indication on whether or not this is going to be a successful WordPress plugin or not. Successful meaning whether it can be developed or not. And I'll actually show you an example. I'll break it down so that you can actually see what that looks like. We're not just going to talk theory and concepts here and fundamentals. We're actually going to take an idea, I'm going to list out the problem, and so that you can see the exact process and that you should be able to follow along. Now, another thing is there a process? And if there is, this is great, because then you know you can automate or speed up the process by using a WordPress plugin. So let's dig deeper and let's look at an example. Okay, so homework time. What you need to do is you need to pull out a WordPad or your favorite word processor and then simply type these out. So number 1, list out the problem. Number 2, what is the manual process? Number 3, how annoying is this process? And number 4, what does this process make you lose? Number 5, what does this process make you want to do right now? Does it want to make you pull out your hair? Number 6, list out possible solutions. So possible meaning different solutions. List out how these solutions would make you better for number 7, make you happier, and make you gain something. So what I'm pushing you through is you're going through what the consumer is thinking. All right. So list out the problems. Let's think about some problems that we actually looked at. If you remember in the previous videos, we found that a lot of people were frustrated with creating fresh content. So creating fresh content on an ongoing basis. So that was one of the major frustrations in relation to the frustrations with the website, remember? Now, what is the manual process? Well, there are many different ways of going about this. So manual process is obviously creating content from scratch. Now, what goes into that content creating from scratch? And I want you to list out everything that you can think of. So in this case, the manual process is finding maybe keywords that people are looking for. So maybe finding topics. So that would go under finding topics. And then when you're finding topics, finding keywords that people are looking for, and then finding or writing articles. And before that, okay, so finding topics, let's see here, finding keywords that people are looking for, how to write the article maybe, and not just finding keywords, but maybe finding key points within that specific content piece. How to write the article, writing it well, grammar. It's just, and as we can see, it's very time consuming. Finding topics, and not just finding topics, but finding topics that are hot or in demand. Now, as we go through this process, what are you noticing right now? I'm noticing that a lot of it is actually the process of finding topics, finding keywords, finding key points. That process seems to be the most tedious process. So by doing this allows you to see where the frustration point is. So it's not necessarily writing the article. Writing the article might be easier because you can always outsource that and you can find somebody to write the article. But finding the topics, finding the keywords, finding the key points, making sure that article is actually interesting, that seems to be the hardest part. So what if we created a plugin that will go out and find content that is hot, demand, and all that? All right. So let's move through here. How annoying is this process? Very time consuming. If you think about just through that one process, doing all that research and all that can take hours. So what does this process make you lose? I lose hours that could be spent on other things. And that's just one article. Very time consuming. Take hours. What does this process make you want to go do right now? It's very frustrating, I can see, because creating, if I have to do this on and on and on, it's a very, very tedious process. So I think in my brain, if I had a plugin that would allow me to find content, maybe not necessarily the topics and all that, but maybe find hot topics, but maybe help me find hot content. And let's see, what does this process make you want to do right now? So makes me want to scream or walk away from the computer and go do something else. All right. So obviously different people is going to be different, but you're thinking about your prospect too. It probably makes them want to scream. It probably makes them want to walk away and go do something else. And that's not productive. So what are kind of possible solutions that we can take? So possible solutions are that they have a WordPress plugin that creates or finds hot topics, keywords, key points. And the question is, how are we going to create the content? Well, there are several different ways in creating content. You can either do content curation, which basically means getting topics and actual content from somebody else and posting it on your site. and maybe responding to that content. So that's content curation. Or you can create content from scratch. Now, like we saw earlier, the tedious process seems to be this right here, because you can always hire somebody to create the content as long as you have this information. Or you can have a system that will find hot topics and hot keywords and key points and all of that and curate the content. Now, we need to figure out what do we want to do. And you have to be very, very specific as much as possible. Remember, the plugin that we saw earlier was a plugin at Envato code canon.net. It was a plugin that basically allowed you to create articles. So create content from scratch. So you could do that, or you could just do content curation. Now, if you create content from scratch, obviously that's going to be very, very tedious. I'm going to tell you right now that unless you're a very highly technical person, and if you're a newbie especially, or intermediate, this is going to be very hard to do. So what you might want to do is you might even want to go further and go on freelancing sites and pay somebody to consult with. So pay a programmer to consult with to try to figure out how hard potentially would it be to do this or do this. So let's do content curation. And I think content curation is super hot. That's what a lot of people are doing. And not just everyone is doing it, but it works. People on Facebook pages, you see every day, most Facebook fan pages, what they're doing is content curation. They're pulling in memes, pictures, or even blogs or sites that are not theirs, but they're sharing it. That's content curation. So let's maybe develop a WordPress plugin that finds hot topics, keywords, key points, and content curation. So finds, in this case, finds hot content that is curated from other people's sites. All right. So list out how these solutions would make your life better. If you had a WordPress plugin that would allow you to go out, find hot content, not just any content, but hot content that is curated from other people's sites. How would make you feel? I would save lots of hours of time, make me happier, gain confidence to focus on my WordPress blog or site. Okay, so essentially what you've just done right now is you figured out what the pain points are. So you can use this later on to create the marketing material for your product. But while doing so, we figured out creating fresh content is on an ongoing basis is the major problem. And then the possible solution is this one here. So this is actually what you really want. So we're going to bold that right here. And I'm going to copy this down here. So the problem and the solution, that's all we want. So the problem's here. And the solution's here. So creating the fresh content on an ongoing basis, our solution is to find hot content that is curated from other people's sites. So in the next video, when we dig even further and we actually create a list, we want to break this down. All right. So that said, let's move on to the next video. Okay, so welcome to video number 5. Let's determine what the software does. So once you figured out what the big problem is going to solve, it's time to figure out how it will do it in more detail. So in the previous video, we figured out what the solution was, what basically how frustrated your consumer would be with the problem and how happy they would be with the problem solved. So now we need to dig deeper further and create what we call a to-do list. And if you've created grocery lists, to-do lists, then creating software specifications is actually very, very similar. And it's actually a very easy thing to do once you have figured out what kind of problem it'll solve and how it will go about doing that. And that's what we're going to do in this particular video. Now, the way to create software is to create a sequential and logical flow. So it's not going to be just a randomized grocery list. It's going to be a sequential logical flow. So whatever you do in the beginning is going to impact the end. And it'll make more sense in just a second. So in other words, if, let's say, for example, if a user clicks a button, you're going to write down what happens. If the user takes a specific action, then what happens? If the user does not take that action, then what happens? So you're really going to have to figure out basically all the steps of the process. And then what happens if this happened, then this happened. If this does not happen, then this does not happen. Or if this does not happen, what happens? So it's kind of like the if and else statements. It's a logical, if this happens, then that happens. So it's kind of like a cause and effect, essentially. If I drop this ball, then the ball bounces, right? If I throw the ball at the wall, then the ball either bounces to the left or the right. But in this case, you're going to know exactly where the ball falls if you're going to be able to develop the software correct. So let me actually look deeper. Let's take an example, and I'm going to show you how this is all going to work so it makes sense to you. Okay, so back to where we left off in the previous video. What we're going to do now is we are going to break down the list of possible solutions. So we already figured out that the problem was creating fresh content on an ongoing basis. Now what we're going to do is we are going to take the list of possible solutions right here, which is finds hot content that is curated from other people's sites and maybe places it on the WordPress post or the page. So let's write that down. So finds hot content that is curated. Let's say break it down here. So basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out the process. Whether you go out on YouTube and you watch a video and you figure out the step-by-step process. What happens behind the scenes, what it does, what the user does to have to interact with the software for it to do such a thing. And you're not going to get everything perfect, but if you find a good programmer, they're going to be able to fill it between the gaps. You're going to be able to figure out what they need to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do as much legwork as possible to make it easy for the programmer. All right, so first we need to have a tool and a WordPress plugin where maybe somebody enters a topic or a keyword. So let's say user enters something like I'll put brackets around it, topics, keywords, something. And then the plugin needs to do something next. So obviously, if you go to Google, for example, and let me break it down. If we go to Google, the user obviously goes to Google. Now, the user essentially can be the plugin. So the plugin goes to Google, then it takes the keyword and the topic, and then it enters it into Google, for example. So let's say we're looking for some hot topics such as kidney stone solutions. All right, so let's just put that here. And so we have that here. So the machine comes here, they look through, and they try to find hot content. Now, the question that we need to figure out is what is considered hot topics? or hot content. It may not necessarily be something that is ranked up here, right? So how do we know if it is hot content or not? Well, one way to figuring out, especially within Google, is when you type in something like kidney stone treatment. You see how Google suggests certain topics and all that? So we know these are hot topics because Google suggests these. In order for these to actually get in here, this basically means that tons and tons of people are typing these in. All right. So maybe we can have a WordPress plugin that goes to Google, we type the keyword in, and it tries to fill in the rest. So maybe it grabs the Google Suggests keywords right here. And then from that, it gives you a list of keywords. All right. So in this case, we can say kidney stone. And then if somebody types that in, it grabs these in here. So let me write that down here. Okay, so user enters topics and keywords. Let's say user goes to Google, and I'm going to rewrite this in a minute, but let's just make it simple. User goes to Google, user enters topics and keywords. Google gives a list of suggested keywords, suggestions. And the normal process is that the user, copies the top 10 suggested keywords. So what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to break it down to what the user does. Don't worry about what the plugin does yet. We're going to do all that in just a minute. So user goes to Google, they type in the keyword, then Google gives a list of keywords. So you're telling us what the machine does and the user does. User copies the top 10 keywords, and then maybe the user goes to, let's say, Facebook or some blog site, maybe Blogger, or let's say, we'll just call this user goes to popular blog directory. User then types in the top 10 suggested keywords, and then user finds hot content. And normally the user would link hot content to the blog. And that's basically the process of finding hot content. So that's the process right here. It's a step-by-step process. See, it's kind of like a grocery list, but it's kind of not in a certain way. It's a sequential, logical, step-by-step process. So if you think about something easier, like baking a cake. So if you look at a recipe, you see that the recipe tells you step-by-step what you need to do. So you need to gather the items. Typically you need to preheat the oven, and then you need to mix in the dry materials before you mix in the eggs and all of that. So there's actually a process to all of this, right? And that's what you're really trying to figure out, is the whole process. Don't worry about the if and else statements yet. Let's just get this done. Okay, so the next thing I normally do is I take this information here, and I'm going to leave that up at the top, but I'm going to make a brand new copy and paste here. So you see everything from here to here. And we'll call this WordPress plugin versus the user. So now what we're trying to do is we're trying to write what the process is, and then we're trying to translate that into how the WordPress plugin acts and how the user acts. Okay, so starting from the beginning again. User goes to Google. Now, in this case, the user is going to have to stay inside of the WordPress plugin. They're not going to be able to leave or anything like that. We're going to want them to be able to click a button and it all happens. All right. So user goes to WordPress plugin after they have activated it. And then the user enters maybe a keyword. All right. Now, obviously, they're still going to have to go to Google, right? But the user's not going to go to Google or any outside sites. That's the WordPress plugin's job, right? So the WordPress plugin, we're just going to call it plugin. Plugin goes to Google and then enters that keyword that the user just typed in. Now, Google gives a list of those suggested keywords, and then the plugin copies those top 10 suggested keywords. Then the plugin goes to the popular blog directory, whatever that we specify later. You could even tell the programmer, hey, I want these lists of, links or directories. And then the user types in the top 10 suggested keywords. Now, in this case, the plugin is doing everything. Typically what happens is the user just enters a keyword and then the plugin does the rest. So the plugin types in the top 10 suggested keywords. Plugin shows shows a list of the hot content. User sees the list and chooses. Then the plugin copies a link of the hot content to the WordPress blog. So this takes somewhat of a practice, but that's why I'm showing you the step-by-step process. So first things first, you go through here, you list it out, then you reorganize it. And then if you notice, what I'm trying to do is I'm just showing what the user sees. So the user goes to the WordPress plugin, they enter a keyword, but then when it times to go outside, the plugin goes and does the rest, and then it pretty much finds the content for us. So really what the user only sees in this case is they're seeing the WordPress plugin, they enter the keyword, they click enter, and then as they're waiting, the plugin shows the hot content and they immediately see the hot content, because a human ultimately is going to have to decide what content is best for them. Now, you could make it automated if you want, and you say plugin sees a list of content and then chooses it based on certain criteria, and then it spits it out. It's all automatic. You can do that. But at the end of the day, you have to pick and choose what is the user going to do as a human, and then what does the plugin do as a machine, and how smart should that machine be. So pretty much that's it. Now, we could go further and we could do if and else statements. So we can go back here and say if the user goes, well, obviously the user is going to go to the plugin. So if we go down here, it says user enters keyword. We could say if the user enters a keyword, do this. Now, obviously, if the user does not enter a keyword, nothing happens. So we don't need that. But if there was a different path or a different option, we could do that as well. So if a user enters a keyword, then we take them on a progression. And I'll show you more about that in the visual map later. But we can say if that happens, then the plugin does this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and then this. Then if user sees a list and chooses, then this. Now obviously, if user does nothing, then nothing happens. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Most of the time that's the case. So we're pretty much done now. That's all we need to do. And if this seems a little complicated, I'm just going to say and put it out there that this does take time. You need to get a hang of it. You could even go about going out and just writing things that you normally do day to day, like brushing your teeth and all of that, and try to get a hang of it first before you actually move forward with this process. It does take time because I am trying to teach you from a programmer to a newbie. So it does take time. So don't worry if you don't get it right the first time, but I'm going to show you how to turn this into a map in the next video. Okay, so welcome to video number 6. We're going to talk about list to flow. Once you've created your step-by-step, sequential, and logical to-do list, you're going to need to turn it into a visual flow chart that makes sense, because this is what's going to help you and the programmer understand how all the missing pieces or pieces of the puzzle flow together. So let's hop on over to Lucidchart and build out your visual map, which is crucial to understanding how it all works. All right, so let me go ahead and show you how. Okay, so we're going to take the list that we created earlier, which was the if then else type statement. As you can see, this one's actually fairly easy because it's pretty self-explanatory. It's very straightforward. Depending on how complex your software is going to be, it's going to vary. So I'm not going to be able to say if it's super complex or whatever, it's going to take you time. I'm not going to be able to tell you how long it's going to take. But ultimately, if you want to sell software, this is all part of the process. Now, we're using Lucidchart, as I told you earlier, and very, very easy to use. What we're trying to do is we're trying to turn what we see here into a visual flow chart. It's going to be able to make more sense when you actually see it visually. All right. So let's just enter this. So WordPress plugin, let's kind of name it first. It's going to be WordPress plugin : hot content finder. And of course, I probably could create a better name for that, but we're just going to go with it. So I'm going to type that in here. And I pulled in a text icon. What's nice about Lucidchart is you can pull these items over and you can create basically a flowchart. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it, not too big like that. And we're going to put that here. And the next thing we want to do is the user goes to the WordPress plugin. All right. So let's just copy a box over here and type that in. So user goes to WordPress plugin. Or what we could do is we could make a user. We could, let's see, I don't know if there's any icons for people in here, but let's see. I'll just make this user, all caps, like that. So what's nice about this is everything is organized. Everything looks nice, and that's what you're trying to do. So WordPress plugin. So user comes here, and what do they see next? They see maybe the settings or something, like some sort of settings or search form. All right, so user goes to plugin, they enter a keyword. Okay, so the next thing is on the search form, they can enter keyword. Now, before we do this, what does the person see? All right, so do they see maybe a list of their campaigns first? So you want to take a look at other plugins and get an idea. So we could have plugins and we can have campaigns. So maybe they see a list of campaigns first. So we'll type in list of campaigns. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it like that. There we go. So user, we'll make the user kind of a pink. So that's nice. You can also change the box colors. You can also change the colors of the text as well and the font as well. You can also drag and drop images into this as well. So there's a lot of things you can do, but just keep it simple. All right, so they see a list of campaigns, and then maybe they have the ability to create new campaigns. So create new campaigns. So what you're doing, as you can see here, it's not exact with this. It's sort of even more. So they have the ability to see a list of campaigns that they can go and edit the campaign, or they can create a brand new campaign. If they create a brand new campaign, then what next? Well, next, maybe they create or find hot content. So within that one campaign, they can find hot content. Now, what else do they see within the campaign? Well, maybe besides that, they can create the name of the campaign. So they name the campaign. All right, so maybe that's what they see first, and then they find hot content. But what do they need to do to find hot content? Well, if you refer back to here, it says if user enters a keyword. So name the campaign, find the hot content, which consists of enter a keyword. All right, so move it here. And then what's next here is then the plugin goes to Google, enters a keyword. So this is all the user needs to do. So maybe what I need to do is I need to color code it. So since the user is kind of a pinkish, maybe I'll make it a green, light green. What I'm going to do is anytime the user does something or sees something, it's going to be green. If the WordPress plugin does something, let's say we're going to make it like a light blue. All right. So the user sees the list of campaigns. That's part of the plugin itself. So I'm going to make this blue, create new campaigns, find hot content. All right, so all of this is blue because this is part of the plugin. So maybe what I'll do is I'm going to color code it. So green means user, blue means WordPress plugin, and we'll call this user interface. And then of course we have the third thing, which is what the user or what the WordPress plugin does. So WordPress plugin action. And we're going to make this maybe a purple, a light purple, right? So that way, every time we see green, it's something that the user does. Every time we see blue, it's what we see as the user interface in the WordPress plugin. And then if the WordPress plugin has to go to Google or anything like that, it's an action. So we see that as purple. All right. So this is our color coded so that we can read it better. So we'll put this here. All right. So enter keyword. That's definitely a green. So that's the user. And as you're going through the process, this process might be somewhat boring, but hey, you know what? This is going to make your life a lot easier when you actually develop the software. All right, so enter a keyword, then what? All right, so then the plugin goes to Google. So remember, this is the action for the plugin. So I'm going to copy that. So what I'm doing is I'm copying this and then I'm pasting it. But I'm using my shortcut keys, so I'm using Control-C and Control-V, like that. So now what I need to do is drag this down here. We don't need this. We're going to put this here. And then next we have the plugin goes to Google and enters a keyword. So goes to Google and enters user keyword. All right, so we're going to link that there. Then what? Well, then Google gives a list of suggested keywords. So obviously that's not the action of anything. So I'm going to, we'll make this white and say Google shows a list of suggested keywords. So that's what happens next. So I'm going to make we're just basically connecting the dots. So I'm connecting it from here to here. That's why you see the arrow going forward. Once it gives a list of the suggested keywords, then the plugin copies the top 10 suggested keywords. So going back here, we're going to copy this, paste that. I'm going to drag it over here and then drag it here, like so. And then grabs top 10 hot. Let's see. Okay, so the plugin grabs the top 10 suggested keywords. Okay, that's what we want. Keywords. Okay, so next, we're almost done. So then the plugin goes to the popular blog directory. So we copy that over here, align it so everything's good. Connect this little dot over to here. And then the plugin goes to X blog directory. You could tell the programmer I want a list that I constantly update of the hottest blog directories, or you could have it just go to one. But that can be elaborated further later on. So it goes to X blog directory and enters the top 10, I'll just call it SK, suggested keywords. All right. So from there, what next? So types it in, and then the plugin shows the hot content. So usually at this point, though, of course, in detail, we have blog shows hot content. So at this point, the WordPress plugin is going to grab the hot content and display it to the user. Now, of course, this is where the user comes in, right? So the user sees the list and chooses. So next, I'm going to put it here. User sees lists of hot content and picks. Next, once after they pick, then what? Okay, we go back here. Then the plugin copies a link of the hot content that the user chooses to the WordPress blog. So copies or adds link to WordPress post or page. Then you could get all elaborate and you could say, hey, after that, you know, the system will allow the user to enter information with their thoughts and all of that on the content so that it is properly content curated. So that's it. That's pretty much all you have to do. And this is what I would do. And at this point, you have this in hand. You have this in hand so the programmer can literally see what's happening all throughout. And then after that, what we need to do is we need to, of course, build out the user interface. So we kind of got a glimpse here. So if we go back here, we can see the user interface right here, right? So we've already done a lot of the legwork. All we have to do is use a graphic program to kind of design what each of these look like. All right. So with that said, I'll see you in the next video.